Hi everyone. This presentation will walk us through a few points that I'd like you to really apply in the next phase of your writing for this class to your own writing about documentary film. We'll be bringing a few things together. We'll be thinking about different film techniques. In the end, we'll be thinking about documentary film's claim to revealing some kind of truth about the world. And we'll be doing this, of course, in the context of the question of the Anthropocene. To help us focus, we'll pay attention to one particular subject that, as we've already noted, makes an appearance in Baykal, Depensier, and Burtynsky's Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, and of course is also, in a sense, the star of Genesis 2.0, that is, the woolly mammoth. So what I'm going to discuss here, and what I'd like you to pay attention to for your next writing assignment, is focusing on that subject, paying attention to a particular shot or very short segment of a scene, and then working outward from there to think about how that shot, that moment, functions in relation to that larger scene. And continue to work outward all the way to thinking about that film in its totality, and then what the film might be saying in conversation with other films or in conversation with bigger ideas that come from outside of the film, right? Including big scientific concepts or conversations taking place in the humanities, questions of ethics and philosophy, and so forth. So let's begin with something concrete and specific. Our friend the mammoth. So again, we'll be focusing, as we did a little bit last week, on shots, scenes, and now I'd like to bring techniques into the fore. Shots, that one moment in a scene, or which we can think of in terms of a screenshot, right? That one still image that functions a little bit like a photograph, but of course isn't a photograph. It's a frozen moment in a moving image. And that moving image is accompanied by sound and dialogue or monologue or a voiceover. There's a lot of other layered information in a film to think about. But it's good to be able to focus for a moment on that one frozen image as a place to begin. Again, you want to think about subject. It could be any number of things. In this shot, the subject could be BGI, the headquarters of the Beijing Genetic Institute, where the scene is shot. It could be CGI animation, which is featured in the film that Semyon Grigoriev in the foreground here is watching. It could be Semyon Grigoriev. He could be the subject. I could even make the subject, something that is a technique at work in the film, how the soundtrack works to create a particular emotional texture, or perhaps to lead the viewer to a particular kind of conclusion. So the subject is whatever you're kind of focusing on and following. Again, I want to focus on our friend the mammoth here. So, if I'm thinking about mammoths, as I like to do, I'm thinking about different scenes with mammoths, different shots with mammoths, what the mammoth is doing, what it means, what it represents, in all kinds of different ways. In this case, we've got our CGI family of mammoths here, computer-generated images, on the BGI screen, right, this promotional video that BGI plays in their headquarters in Shenzhen. As I'm thinking about all of this stuff, I also then want to think about the documentarian, the filmmaker, how the filmmakers are doing this, right? In this case, we have Christian Frey and his collaborator, Maxim, who shoots the shots up in Siberia, and while Christian Frey is traveling around in New York and Shenzhen, and so forth. Anyway, we've got these techniques to think about. You know, in a still shot, we can think about what we see, the framing, the composition, the angle, the focus, what's in the foreground, what's in the background, how it's all put together. That idea of mise en scène, right? That French phrase that tells us that a careful filmmaker has carefully thought about where everything is in a frame. But we can also think about what changes. This is film. The scene will shift and change. It's dynamic. It's not frozen. It's composed of frames, of still images. That's how film is originally, right, produced, that trick our eye into seeing movement. So we want to focus on the movement as well. And that's also got to do with the soundtrack, right? Whether that's sound effects and or music or something else making a sound. Camera movement, of course, pans, zooms, etc. Editing techniques, cuts, fades, etc. And then other elements. One I'll highlight here would be speech, which might come in the form of a voiceover. Often in documentary, you have that narrative voiceover. A monologue. It could be an interviewee speaking without us hearing the questions that the interviewer asks, etc. Or a dialogue. That says dialogue. That's a typo. There's no such thing as sialogue. Or chowlogue. That's dialogue. My bad. I'll fix that slide. So, in my analysis, I need somewhere to begin, right? There's too much to write about. That's why I like this method, just starting with a shot and working outward, toward a sequence or a scene. Something concrete that you can really focus on and get into. And this is from the text I asked you to read, Starting Places for Writing About Film, from the Purdue Writing Lab. The link is here. I'll share this with you. It's elsewhere as well. Just simply describe a shot. Sometimes just writing a good detailed description will indicate an argument about how the filmmakers wanted us to see something in the world. So it can move us into analysis. Just a kind of objective description of what you're seeing without forcing an interpretation can lead you to a really sophisticated, nuanced, insightful interpretation. That's my argument. And let's see how that might work for you. So we've got this still scene, and here I've got "It Guarantees the Continuation of Life." I've got the subtitle up there. So there's text, there's Chinese text, and there are cute little mammoths. When you're writing about a scene, here are a few things to do. And these are guidelines. Like all guidelines, they can be bent or sometimes broken, but they're guidelines for a good reason. So let's practice this stuff before we break these rules, generally. Write in the present tense when you write about film, or literature for that matter. You usually write in the present tense when you're talking about what happens in a story, in a narrative. Use concrete, not abstract verbs and nouns. Of course, you'll sometimes use abstract ones, but concrete ones are things that appeal to the senses. The senses of sight, touch, right? Sound, hearing, taste, smell, right? Things that the body can interpret and engage with, as well as the mind. Describe action. Again, what's happening? What do you see? What are people doing? What's the camera doing, etc.? What's the soundtrack doing? Describe a point, and that's what we're doing now, looking at a shot or a very short segment of scene, just as a place to start, right? Again, just as one of many places, one place among many to begin, we're beginning with this. So here's what I wrote, kind of thinking about this scene, which I picked almost at random. I mean, it has mammoths in it, so it wasn't random, but most of the movie has some mammoth part or piece or tusk in it somewhere. Anyway, so I try to just describe what I see. The camera captures Semyon Grigoriev from behind, silhouetted against the enormous curved wall-spanning BGI screen and a polished reflective floor. At one point, and that's this point, right? I'm imagining this in the context of a larger essay perhaps, but at one point, as the mellow-toned Chinese accented English male voiceover, that's a little awkward, but you know what I mean. So the mellow-toned Chinese accented English male voiceover tells us that BGI's work, quote, guarantees the continuation of life, unquote. Grigoriev's head is cast against a CGI family of mammoths. I kind of love this little image now that I'm thinking about it. 3 adults and a baby. As they stride across the stream, momentarily as lifelike as the man viewing them, though they are partially obscured by the words, gene technology, so that the resurrection of extinct species is possible. So this is my description of this scene. There's other stuff you could pay attention to. You could describe it in many other ways. But, I'm struck here by how the camera and the directors, I assume Christian Frey here, managed to capture and then show us Grigoriev, who of course is obsessed with mammoths. That's his life's work, and the idea of bringing them back to life is at the heart of the film. And here he is kind of watching them as if they were real and alive, the promise that they could be, they might be, that it's possible. He's with them. He's very much with them in this image. He's amongst them, right? He feels very close to them. They almost feel alive, or maybe more alive than he does in a way. So it's an interesting scene to me, moment. So, what I'm hoping you guys will work on is something similar, just with a different scene in this film, or going back to Anthropocene, or as we move forward into Cave of Forgotten Dreams.